Hey everybody, I have Jim Barber back for the third time on the channel. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you, Rick.
So Jim and I were talking the other day. Remember, I was sitting out in the backyard, we were having this conversation about why young artists don't have long careers anymore, why it's uncommon to have long careers. And Jim said,
I think it's really strange that we grew up in an era where people had such long careers. That the anomaly is the end of the 60s through the end of the 20th century, and not the way things are now. Now we're sort of back to normal, the way things were in the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, up into most of the 60s.
And I said, wow, that's such an interesting take. And I was like, we should really talk about that. Okay, so let's pick a group that had an incredibly long career and talk about that. Who's comes to top of mind?
I think let's talk about the Rolling Stones or Bob Dylan,
who are both out touring still.
Both out touring still. I'm not sure they've made, actually Dylan probably made relevant records well into his fourth decade. He made some bad records in between, but in the Stones, we were talking maybe.
Well, I said start me up. You know, I'm talking when I say relevant records, I think of when they had a big single. That was 1981. So 1960, well, you know, 63, 65, Satisfaction came out.
And I think it's really wild that they had really important records for almost 20 years.
Yeah. But you say that that's actually not the norm. That's so unusual.
Well, for most of the history of the record business, the audience has been teenagers. And once a generation of teenagers aged out and grew up and got a job, they quit buying records, and you had to capture the next generation.
Okay, so let's talk about a different band, U2. Who are the people that started following U2? Let's say they were 18 and 19 in 1980. Let's see, Bono was born in 60, so he was 20. And the other two guys were 19. So the two of them were 22 or 19 in the band. And their audience was people that were teenagers into their 20s at the beginning.
I have a pretty negative take on that. I actually think U2 were the one band of their generation that were adopted and approved by the generation before. So the Jan Winter Rolling Stone crowd decided, hey, U2's a band we can get behind, and their fans were probably older. U2 fans are not Duran Duran fans, who were a band that really did appeal to young people.
Okay, so when I went to see U2 back in the 30 years ago, however many, I can't even remember how many years ago, I'm their age.
Yes.
Okay, so when I went to their concerts, it was people my age. So I was contemporary with the band, but historically, bands would be older than their audience.
Yes.
Let's talk about that for a second. Let's just veer off in that. Why is that? When the Beatles came up, their
fans were definitely younger than they were.
Yeah.
Part of it was that music was for kids. Right. That popular music was, and Frank Sinatra's fans were younger than he was in the 1940s. He may be the first artist to reinvent himself and have a longer career, because when he came back on Capitol Records in the 1950s, he sort of created an adult market for music that had never existed before. And then the next generation came along, and when rock artists started making albums, they said, "Oh, we can graduate."
Okay, let's just go back to U2. So let's say that their average listener in 1980 was their age. So let's say that they were 20 years old.
Right.
Okay. So by 2004, those people are 44 years old.
I would say that the demographic on YouTube, by the time The Unforgettable Fire was such a massive hit, the age had risen a lot. That people who were 5, 10, 15 years older who were still in the record buying market were fans of U2.
Would you say the same thing about R.E.M?
No, I think R.E.M actually did not cooperate with the powers that be as well as U2 did. We love U2, we know how much people love U2, but U2 definitely played into the iconography of what people expected a 70s rock band to be.
True.
And R.E.M followed their own muse a bit more, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe to their creative benefit and their career detriment.
Over time to their career detriment.
That's a band that I look at who did exactly what they wanted. And maybe U2 did exactly what they wanted, but whatever they were doing fit their elders' ideal of what a rock band should be.
Okay, and R.E.M's career, 1981 to 96. Yeah. Obviously, they put out records after that.
And some of them were big hits in Europe.
Some of them were big hits in
Europe. So in
Europe.
America, though, I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, through Monster, essentially.
Yes.
And it's a really interesting parallel.
Yes, they're the same exact moment and generation of music.
Yes.
And they are very interesting because they're a new generation from the 60s, early 70s boomer bands. They were the next thing that came along.
And is there a crossover between their audiences? I think there was later on. Out of Time, 1990, I believe. Then Achtung Baby, 1991. Then you had Automatic, 1992. Massive, both bands.
College radio kids of the 80s were listening to both bands all the time.
Yeah.
They were the two twin towers of college radio in that era.
Okay, and did they both weather grunge?
Wow, this is a tough one. I think R.E.M. actually did a little better.
They did, because Kurt Cobain wasn't saying, I'm hanging out with Bono. He was hanging out with Michael Stipe.
That's true, and I think they were making, some of their best records came during that era. Mm-hmm. And while my favorite U2 record is Achtung Baby, I think U2 was lost for a moment for a few years after that. Their records, they were trying to figure out how to fit in, and R.E.M. was just going whatever path they were going, and it worked.
Not to belabor the U2 thing, but I said this before we started recording this, that U2 made a decision in 1997 when they put out the pop record, which was kind of a failure, at least a commercial failure in the US, and they made a decision to embrace Euro dance music, okay, which to me was maybe 10 years too early.
Yeah.
They did kind of what Coldplay has done, where they abandoned American rock music. They became a band big here, really, first, right? That's fair to say. And then they embraced that Euro dance music and appealed to European audiences more. And U2 then came back with All You Can't Leave Behind and How to Dismantle an Atom.
I'd call it a strategic retreat. And All That You Can't Leave Behind, they won a Grammy for Record of the Year with Beautiful Day.
Yep.
It's a four-square rock record. It's the U2 record that people who liked them 10 years before,
City of Blinding Lights.
People who didn't like Achtung Baby so much, so it's like, let's dial it back one step from there and give people
Bring back the echo.
And it worked.
It worked. I could say the Beatles had an 8-year career, and then they let it go. Then they went on to their solo projects. Was that more the norm?
I think, yeah. I think if you went back and read, especially the British press, people thought it was weird the Beatles had lasted into 1967.
I think the Beatles thought it was weird they would last till 1967.
Because their audience managed to grow with them. This was a whole new path for the music business, and the next generation of executives that came in were like, hey, let's keep selling these people who we've already broken, is because the audience is aging. That generation of people continue to buy records, I would say, well into their 40s because they replaced everything on CD in the 80s.
What about artists like Billy Joel? Now, Billy Joel, I mentioned this before we started, he made the Glass Houses record, which was a new wave record when new wave was big. Artists used to do that. They would embrace the new style, co-opt it or whatever, and write songs in that style, a guitar record, and a hugely successful record for him.
The Stones did it with disco.
Instead of new artists coming in, the old artists would just adapt their style.
And that's actually, to get back to the point I was trying to make, that's pretty weird.
Yes.
Like, it was not allowed in 1966 that you would adapt your sound. Once your sound was over, people moved on to the next thing. And we grew up in this era where people got to have these incredibly long careers. The idea that Santana had a hit record over 30 years after his first one, like, that's inconceivable. That's maybe the largest gap we could come up with, that somebody sold 12 million records over 30 years into their career.
A band that I mentioned before, Coldplay, has a new record out now. There's a lot of co-writes. I listened to it this morning. There's some good songs on it. Max Martin co-wrote a bunch of the songs. They have been together since the mid-90s. First record came out, I believe, 99 or so. Now we're 25 years into their career. Chris Martin said that they're going to retire next year. They reinvented themselves and started working with outside writers to do that.
Which is something Aerosmith had done before. But
Correct.
I think at some point, Coldplay stopped being a rock band.
Right.
In 2010, 2012, it's like, I don't know who their audience is anymore, because I don't think most people we hang out with don't buy Coldplay records, but somewhere in the world, there are people who still are eagerly awaiting the new Coldplay album, and it still works for them.
I think it's younger people. To me, people that I know that liked Coldplay in the first 3 records, I mean, they started to abandon them at X and Y during that record, 3rd record.
Here's a band we haven't talked about. And it's just come up, and I've been thinking about it. A band that really illustrates how weird all of this is, and that's Pearl Jam.
Yes.
So after 1 record, Pearl Jam completely abandoned the notion of what you need to do to be a successful rock band. They turned their back on radio. They didn't really even write singles for their records.
But they did have singles. They had great singles.
Right, but they didn't make videos for them.
They did not, no.
And because they didn't make videos, they never crossed back over to pop ever again.
Right.
So they existed in their own universe. I guess they can sell as many tickets as they ever have been able to. Their fan base has not gone away.
Yeah, they still sell 25,000 seat venues.
I guess it's sort of like the Grateful Dead.
Yeah.
But they've had a long career by completely turning their back on the idea of we're going to be relevant in mainstream music.
I'm going to talk about one of your favorite bands, the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Jim. Now, Jim doesn't like the Red Hot Chili Peppers. It's not a thing that he gets.
As human beings, I'm sure they're excellent people. I think Flea is a really great person.
He's a great person.
He's done amazing things for the community in Silver Lake. He cares about music education for kids. Flea is a great person.
Chili Peppers have had hit records from the late 80s.
With your friend Rick Rubin.
They've been able to weather the storm and have successful singles. I don't know how successful their singles are now. Is their audience growing? Are they young people? I haven't been to a show in a long time. It's really hard to gauge these things. When I went to see Metallica, they have young people. They have people my age. They have people older.
That's one thing that's so weird to me. So let's say we're teenagers in the early 80s.
Yeah.
Would we be listening to music from 1942? It's absolutely baffling to me that there was nothing more irrelevant to us. I mean, we've come to love many records from the 30s and 40s as our taste evolved. But when we were kids, there was nothing more irrelevant to us than music from 40 years ago. Now, we were being force-fed music from 20 years earlier or 25 years earlier, and that was probably a little weird. But kids now are listening to music that their grandparents could have made.
Does it even matter to kids, Jim, if they're listening, if they're pulling up Spotify and they don't see the groups live and they're not watching videos? Does it even matter how old they are?
It mattered to kids in 1962.
It did matter to kids. I played Layla today, played her a Coldplay song. So listen to the new record.
Yeah.
Do you know who this is? She said, sounds like the singer for Coldplay. And I wouldn't say that Layla listens to Coldplay a lot, but she immediately recognized Chris Martin's voice. Yet that's not music of her era. Chris Martin has got to be
50?
Close, at least. Late 40s, at least. That's not music of Layla's era. She's listening to Sabrina Carpenter and Billie Eilish, things like that.
But what does she care about?
Well, she cares about that, but she also cares about the Police and things like that.
Our kids were raised in households with a lot of music around.
Yeah, it's not that's probably not a fair comparison to compare our kids. If I think about what her friends are interested in, they're interested in things that are big on TikTok.
As it should be.
Yeah.
Well, I'll come back to, it's another difficult thing for people once they turn 40 and they start complaining about young bands. It's like, well, it's not for you. It's not always going to be for you. Things change. That generation doesn't care what you think. And if you don't understand the way music sounds for the kids now, that's probably not a bad thing.
Love to know your thoughts on this. Leave a comment. Check out Jim's Substack, Stars.
After Stars.
I was going to say, I was going to have you do the first Stars.
Stars after Stars after Stars.
Thanks for watching.